Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going deep on the life and legacy of former President Jimmy Carter.
Oh, this will be good.
We're working from an excerpt of his obituary,
Okay.
and it is just packed with fascinating stuff. So we'll trace his journey from peanut farmer to the White House.
From peanuts to the presidency.
Exactly.
Wow.
We'll dig into his achievements as president, the challenges he faced, and the amazing work he did after leaving office.
Yeah, his post-presidency is really something else.
Absolutely. It really is. But first, you don't typically think of a peanut farmer from Plains, Georgia ending up as president, right?
It's not the usual path to power, that's for sure.
Right. It's such a unique story. And I love how he even bucked tradition during his inauguration.
Oh, so.
He walked hand in hand with his wife and daughter down Pennsylvania Avenue, breaking with presidential norms.
Huh. Interesting. What do you think was behind that?
Well, I think we need to consider the context. He came into office after Watergate, a time when public trust in government was at an all-time low.
Right. Makes sense.
That simple act of walking with his family, it was a powerful symbol. It projected humility, accessibility.
Yeah, like he was one of us.
Exactly. He wanted to show the nation he was different, a departure from the perceived corruption and elitism of the past.
It's a fresh start.
Exactly. Okay, so let's rewind a bit. He was born and raised in Plains, a small town steeped in Southern values. How did that early life shape him, do you think?
Well, that rural upbringing instilled in him this strong work ethic, a deep sense of community, values that stayed with him his whole life.
It's like that foundation really stuck with him.
It did. And you know what's really interesting? His return to the family peanut farm after his father's death, that was a turning point. It's what led him into politics.
Oh, wow. So it was a kind of a back to his roots moment that propelled him forward?
Yeah, you could say that. He started small, serving on the local school board, then later as a state senator.
Okay, so it wasn't a straight shot to the Oval Office. He really paid his dues, so to speak. But how did he go from, peanut farmer to president? Was there a defining moment that kind of pushed him onto the national stage?
Well, his time as governor of Georgia was definitely crucial.
Oh, right. He took office in 1970 during a period of immense change in the South.
Exactly. Think about it. The civil rights movement was reshaping everything, and Carter, a Southern Democrat, he had to navigate these really complex shifting tides.
That must have been a tightrope walk, politically speaking. A lot of Southern Democrats back then were really resistant to change.
Oh, absolutely. But Carter, he was a pragmatist. He understood the need for compromise, for bridge building.
So he wasn't afraid to challenge the old ways, but he also knew how to work within the system to achieve progress.
Exactly. He found that balance.
Okay, so then, seemingly out of nowhere, he launches this presidential bid in 1976 against incumbent President Gerald Ford, no less. What were the odds?
I mean, on paper, it seemed like a long shot. But the political landscape was threat for change.
You're talking about the post-Watergate era, right?
Exactly. The nation was disillusioned, craving honesty and integrity. And Carter, he sensed that. He campaigned as an outsider, untainted by Washington politics.
It's like he was the antidote to the cynicism of the time.
His slogan, "A leader for a change." It perfectly captured the mood of the nation.
It's amazing how a simple phrase can become so powerful when it aligns with the zeitgeist,
It's true. And his ability to connect with voters on a personal level, that was key too.
Right. It wasn't just about policies, it was about character.
Exactly. He presented himself as a man of faith, a family man, someone who understood the everyday struggles of Americans.
And he reminded people that, hey, even a president is human,
And in that moment, that human touch, that authenticity, was exactly what people were yearning for.
Okay, so he wins. Against all odds, he becomes the 39th president of the United States. It's incredible. But what were his top priorities when he stepped into the Oval Office? What was at the top of his agenda?
Well, restoring faith in government was a huge priority. After Watergate, that was essential. He emphasized transparency, ethical conduct, trying to rebuild trust.
Damage control, almost.
In a way, yes. But he also had a broader vision. He was deeply committed to human rights, both domestically and internationally.
Right, that was a big part of his platform.
And energy independence was another key focus. He pushed for conservation and the development of alternative energy sources. Remember, this is during a time of major energy crises.
Well, right. Those oil embargoes were causing havoc back then.
Exactly. So those were some of the big issues he tackled right out of the gate.
So he's got this ambitious agenda, this desire to make a real difference. But was there a defining moment, something that really captures the essence of his presidency?
Well, for me, it's got to be the Camp David Accords.
Oh, of course. The historic peace agreement between Egypt and Israel.
Right. He personally brokered that deal in 1978. It was a monumental achievement, one that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize.
It was like he pulled off the impossible, bringing these sworn enemies to the negotiating table and forging a lasting peace.
It's a testament to his patience, his persistence, and his belief in the power of dialogue.
It really is a remarkable achievement, but even with that success, his presidency wasn't all smooth sailing, was it?
Sadly, no. He faced some really serious challenges.
The elephant in the room, of course, being the Iran hostage crisis.
That's right. In 1979, Iranian militants stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and took 52 Americans hostage. It was a tense standoff that lasted for over a year.
And despite Carter's efforts, the crisis remained unresolved when he left office.
It really overshadowed everything else he accomplished.
How do you think the American public reacted to the hostage situation?
It was a mix of frustration, helplessness, and anger.
It's easy to see how that event could have eroded public confidence in his leadership.
It certainly played a role.
So you have this diplomatic triumph with the Camp David Accords, but then this unresolved hostage crisis that kind of looms over everything.
It was a difficult time, no doubt.
And aside from the hostage crisis, what other challenges did Carter face during his presidency?
Well, the economy was a major issue. Inflation was soaring, unemployment was rising, and people were feeling the pinch.
Oh, right. We talked about those oil embargoes earlier. It's like everything was connected.
It was a tough time to be president, that's for sure. And ultimately, all of these factors contributed to his defeat in the 1980 election against Ronald Reagan.
It's almost like the weight of those challenges, especially the hostage crisis, became just too much to overcome.
I think that's a fair assessment.
But here's the thing, and this is what I find so fascinating about Jimmy Carter. His story doesn't end with that defeat.
Not at all.
In fact, you could argue that his post-presidency was even more impactful than his time in office.
You could definitely make that argument.
It's remarkable, isn't it? Instead of fading into the background, he embarks on this whole new chapter. He dedicates himself to humanitarian work, to global diplomacy. It's a complete transformation.
It really is. And that's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, folks, hold on tight because things are about to get even more interesting. We'll be right back after a quick break.
So we're back and ready to dig into Carter's post-presidency. This is where he really steps onto the world stage, not as a politician, but as a humanitarian.
It's an incredible transformation. You mentioned Habitat for Humanity earlier. What do you think drew him to that organization specifically?
Well, it aligns so perfectly with his core values, service, compassion, community. And remember, he wasn't just lending his name to the cause, he was out there swinging a hammer, sweating right alongside the volunteers.
Yeah, I love that. A former president building homes for people in need. It really speaks to his humility. Do you have any examples of impactful habitat projects he worked on?
One that stands out is the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter Work Project.
Okay, yeah.
It's an annual event that brings together thousands of volunteers to build homes all over the world. They've helped build and improve over 4,300 homes in 14 countries.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about making a difference, but to actually get out there and mobilize people, resources, and create that kind of tangible impact, it's really inspiring.
It is.
So we've got this hands-on work with Habitat, and then you've got the Carter Center tackling these global scale issues. What was his vision for the Carter Center? What did he want to achieve?
He really envisioned it as this nonpartisan organization focused on resolving conflicts, advancing democracy, human rights, and improving global health. It was about tackling the root causes of these problems, not just putting a Band-Aid on the symptoms.
So it was a multifaceted approach, kind of tackling these issues from all angles.
Exactly.
What would you say are some of the Carter Center's most notable achievements?
One area where they've had just an unbelievable impact is the fight against guinea worm disease.
Okay.
It's this debilitating parasitic infection that was once widespread in Africa and Asia. Millions of people were affected.
Wow.
And the Carter Center, working with partners, they led this global eradication campaign.
Eradicated? Is that even possible?
They've come so close. In 1986, there were an estimated 3.5 million cases globally. By 2022, that number had plummeted to just 13.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Right. It just shows the power of sustained, focused effort, and that even these seemingly insurmountable challenges can be overcome.
Absolutely. That's a real testament to his leadership and the work of the Carter Center. It's inspiring to see that kind of progress on such a huge issue.
Definitely.
So, beyond disease eradication, what other areas did the Carter Center focus on?
They've been really instrumental in monitoring elections in emerging democracies, ensuring that they are free and fair. And they've also been deeply involved in conflict resolution, working to mediate disputes and facilitate peace talks in different regions.
So it's not just about health and poverty, it's about promoting democratic values and peaceful solutions to conflict. A really holistic approach, I guess you could say.
Exactly. And it's important to note that they don't just impose solutions from the outside. They work in partnership with local communities, listening to their needs and empowering them to create lasting change.
That makes sense. Sustainable solutions have to come from within, right?
Absolutely. And I think Carter, having been in politics, he understood the importance of diplomacy, building relationships, and listening to different perspectives. He brought that same approach to his work with the Carter Center.
Okay, so he takes those lessons learned from his time in Washington and applies them to his humanitarian efforts.
Yeah.
But let's be honest, not everyone was on board with Carter's post-presidency work. There were some criticisms.
Yeah. Some accused him of interfering in the affairs of other countries, being naive in his belief that dialogue could resolve complex conflicts.
So kind of pushing back against his more idealistic approach.
Yeah, you could say that. And there was also criticism from within the U.S. government, some who felt he was undermining their foreign policy objectives.
So he wasn't afraid to step on some toes.
He wasn't. But Carter, he stood firm in his commitment to peace and human rights, even when it meant facing criticism or controversy.
It sounds like he wasn't seeking approval. He was driven by his own moral compass.
That's right. He was a man of principle.
Okay, I want to circle back to the Iran hostage crisis for a moment. How did that experience, that ordeal, shape his worldview and approach to diplomacy, do you think?
It was a profoundly impactful experience. It left him feeling frustrated, powerless, but it also, I think, strengthened his belief in the importance of dialogue, even with those who hold opposing views.
It must have been tempting to respond with force, to take a hard line.
It would have been understandable, for sure, but he remained dedicated to diplomacy, even when it wasn't easy.
It's like he saw it as the only path to lasting peace.
He did. And that belief in the possibility of a better world, it's a key part of his legacy.
It's a powerful message, especially today when the world often feels so divided.
It is. It's a reminder that there's always another way, a path towards understanding and reconciliation.
Absolutely. So we've talked about his work with Habitat, the Carter Center, his unwavering commitment to peace and diplomacy. But I want to touch on something else that strikes me about Jimmy Carter. His ability to connect with people from all walks of life.
Oh, absolutely. Despite holding the highest office in the land, he had never lost touch with his roots.
He was grounded, approachable.
He was.
He was a man who defied easy categorization.
That's true.
Farmer, engineer, politician, humanitarian. It's like he embraced those contradictions and used them to connect with people on a human level.
And he transcended those usual labels and divisions, reminding us that we're all more alike than we are different.
Right, we're all human at the end of the day. And I think that's a really powerful message, especially in today's world, which often feels so polarized and fragmented.
We are all looking for leaders who can bring us together, who can remind us of our shared humanity. And Jimmy Carter, in his own unique way, did just that.
We're back, and I'm still thinking about how all of Carter's experiences, from growing up in a small town to his time in the Navy, they really seem to have shaped his leadership style.
It's pretty remarkable when you think about it. Like, those early years really seem to have instilled in him this interesting mix of idealism and pragmatism.
Right. He had these big goals for peace and justice, but also this really practical understanding of how to, actually get things done.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about having a vision. It's about knowing how to make it a reality. And I think his time in the Navy, especially under Admiral Rickover, probably had a lot to do with that.
Oh, absolutely. Rickover was known for being incredibly demanding, pushing people to their limits, expecting excellence.
Right. Like, that experience must have given Carter a strong sense of discipline, attention to detail, this drive to really achieve his goals.
So it's like all these pieces of his life, from his small town upbringing to the tough demands of, working on nuclear submarines, it all kind of came together to create the leader he became.
It's true. And I think that unique background is what allowed him to connect with so many different kinds of people. He could relate to farmers and world leaders, engineers and peace activists.
It's funny because we often think of presidents in terms of their policies or their political wins and losses. But with Carter, it feels like his character, who he was as a person, is just as important a part of his legacy.
You're absolutely right. I mean, his sincerity, his humility, his belief in people, that really comes through in everything he did, both as president and afterwards.
Okay, but let's be honest.
Okay.
Even with all the good he did, a lot of historians consider Carter's presidency a failure. How do we make sense of that view when you look at all the incredible things he accomplished after leaving office?
Well, I think it's important to remember that judging a presidency, it's complicated.
Yeah.
You can't just look at the short-term successes or failures. You have to consider the long-term impact, the things that maybe take years or even decades to really see.
Right. You have to look at the bigger picture, the challenges he faced, and maybe some of the seeds he planted that, blossomed later on.
Yeah. And in Carter's case, he dealt with some major challenges. A struggling economy, an energy crisis, the Cold War, and of course the Iran hostage crisis, which really defined his presidency in a lot of ways.
So he was up against some pretty significant obstacles.
Absolutely. But even with those setbacks, his commitment to his values never wavered. He fought for human rights, he pursued peace, he believed in dialogue and diplomacy.
So it's not just about getting immediate results. Sometimes it's about setting the stage for a better future, even if you don't see it happen right away.
Right. And that's, I think, the key to understanding Carter's legacy. He might not have had a perfect presidency, but he was a man of principle, a man of action, and a man who believed in a more just and compassionate world.
He showed us that leadership isn't about power. It's about service, about empathy, and about never giving up on what really matters.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into the life and legacy of Jimmy Carter.
He really was an incredible figure. He defied expectations, he embraced contradictions, and ultimately showed us that a life spent serving others is a life well lived.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for joining us on this journey. I hope you learned something new today, and remember, there's always more to discover, more to explore, and more ways to make a difference in the world. Until next time, keep on diving in.